Let's continue building our analysis down below here and start using some if statements. If statements are very powerful in financial modeling and used very frequently. So there's a bunch of different ways to use them, and I'm going to walk through some examples with you now. Let's first off, let's take a look at these periods, and let's use some if statements around these periods. The first thing I want to know is for the annual period. If it's less than a full year, I want to flag it as a stub year. And if it's as long as it's a year or more, then I'm just going to call it like a normal year or something like that. So let's put our cursor right below annual period. Then let's practice inserting a row. So let's press Alt H, I for insert, and R for row. And then I'm going to put here stub or full year. And let's practice a very basic if statement here. Let's say if, open bracket, if, and then we're going to have a logical test, a value if true, and a value if false. So the logical test is if the number in this cell here is less than 1, meaning it's less than a full year, then I want to return in quotation marks stub, close quotes. Otherwise, I want to say full year, close quote, and close bracket. So what you can see here is that because this is less than 1, it's just returned the word stub. Let's practice aligning right here. So let's press Alt H AR for align right. And I'm going to hold down Shift and the right arrow and press Control R to fill this right. And we see that it's working. So we've got a stub year in the first period, and then we've got full years thereafter. So this is a way to use an if statement to do a logical test and then return a string of text. Let's look at another example down below where instead of returning a string of text, we're going to return a number. So let's say that we want to know which years have total operating expenses that are greater than 150,000. So let's say we only want to highlight those years. Otherwise, we want zeros. So let's put here and what I want to do is I want to put down here if less than 150,000. And I'm actually going to type that number here to make this dynamic. And then I'm going to copy this and paste it below, and then I'm going to say if greater than or equal to 150,000. I'm going to select these and pressing Alt H F C, make them this shade of blue. So now what I can do is I can make a formula that says if, open bracket, if the total expenses, if the total expenses are less than this number here, which I'm going to lock in place with F4, then I want you to return that value of the total expenses. Otherwise, I want you to return nothing. So in this case, you see that this is indeed below 150,000, and so we return the value. If I select this and fill it to the right, you see what happens here is that as soon as it crosses over to 150,000, we return the value 0. Now let's do the second example. This time we're going to say if the total operating expenses are greater than or equal to, and I've set it greater than or equal to so that we capture the instance where expenses might be exactly 150,000. If we only did the first line as less than and the second line as greater than, we would actually miss the instance where it might be 150,000 evenly. So I've said greater than or equal to, and then I've said if it is greater than or equal to, I want you to return the number. Otherwise, I want you to return 0. So in these first years, we should have 0. And let's just go back into this formula and make sure we've done our locking properly. So we know that we need to lock C45 because we're always going to be referencing relative to that number. And the other parts of this formula we want to be dynamic. So let's try copying that right and see if that works. And great, we see that in these earlier years, we're always less than 150,000, and then we switch over. And we can see that these two if statements are working correctly because we're just highlighting on the first row only they should be less than 150, and on the second row they should be greater than. So this is a powerful way to do some if analysis, and I'm going to just format these quickly to be the same as everywhere else in the model. So I copied and I'm going to paste special. Some formatting. And there we go. We've got another use of the if statement. So we've got an if statement that's returning some words here. We've got an if statement that is returning a value, a number, or a 0. And let's work through a couple other examples of using if statements. Another use of if statements is for error checking and ensuring the model is working properly. So let's do an error check here. And what I want to do is, and actually I'm gonna copy this and move it down because I'm going to add an extra line here that just says total expenses. And on this line here, I'm going to use alt equals to do our quick auto sum. I'm going to take the total of these two rows and fill it right. And essentially what I want to do is make sure that for some reason I'm not double counting here, that this formula is not double referencing the total expenses. So what I would do is I would say here if the total expenses in this line equals the total expenses in this line, then let's say okay. So we're error free, otherwise say error, and then close bracket. I can press Alt H and AR to align right, and then I can fill this right. So I can see that we're okay here. There's no double counting of expenses with these greater than or less than functions. But just in case, let's just type an example to see what would happen if even this was off by $1. All of a sudden, I've got an error message there. So we can see that this is working properly. I'm going to undo that with Control Z. So now we've got an error check here. It's very common to use this on the balance sheet to make sure that assets equals liabilities plus shareholders' equity. You might want to set up this OK or error function to make sure that they're balancing correctly. And one final thing that I'm going to show you how to do, we've covered it earlier in the course, but just to review and make this extra dynamic, let's adjust these labels here so that if I change this number here to be 170,000 instead of 150, it's actually going to update in the label here. So to do that, press F2 and using Control and the left arrow get to the beginning of the string of text. Now we're going to change it to a formula, so it's going to be equals, and I'm going to open quote if less than, and then I'm going to close the quote here. I'm going to delete the 150,000 that I've typed in as a hard code, and I'm going to put an ampersand, and then pressing F2 to get out and move the cursor, I'm going to select this number here. So now it says it's the same as before, except when I change this, so let's say I change this to be 180,000, it's actually updated in my formula here, and I can now see that I've got some issues here because that's actually triggered an error here where I'm double counting expenses. So I'm going to change this back to 150,000, and I'm going to make this dynamic as well by pressing F2, going back to the beginning of the string of text, setting it equal to a formula where I open quote, then I close quote, delete the text, use an ampersand, am pressing F2 to get out and move the cursor, I select cell C46. So now we've got this totally dynamic, and if I want to go one step further to avoid double counting, I'm actually going to set this number here to be equal to the number above, and then I'm going to change it to be black because it's now a formula. What that means is that if I change this number, I can't inadvertently double count like it was earlier. So that actually changes the way this analysis is performed. So I always want to just capture the expenses once. So now I've got a dynamic setup here where the labels are changing and all these functions are changing, and I'm always in an error-free situation because I've made it more dynamic. So a few more examples here of how you can use if and dynamic headers to create powerful analysis.